Hey, what's up, guys? It's Michael from the Honest Youth Pastor, back with another Tik Tok Tuesday. You liked it so much the first time, we're going to do it again. Today, we are looking at a TikTok about Jesus equals Sophia. What does that mean? Well, let's watch the TikTok, and then we'll dissect it. Let's go.
What you're about to learn is some of the most radical information you've ever heard about Christianity or Jesus Christ ever. Like, you're never going to be able to think about this stuff the same way again. And the crazy part is that this is as orthodox as it gets. All Christians have agreed on this since the beginning, and almost nobody realizes what it really means. One of the earliest Christian convictions was that Jesus Christ was the incarnation of Lady Wisdom. Who's Lady Wisdom? Lady Wisdom, or Sophia in the Greek, is a character who appears in the book of Proverbs, also the Apocrypha. Christians have always declared that she was the pre-incarnate Christ, the eternal Logos. At the Council of Nicaea, no one was debating this fact. They were debating how to interpret it. Paul is universally clear that Jesus is Sophia, Sophia is Jesus, and Hebrews backs this up. What this means is that Jesus is, in fact, a woman as well as a man. He's intersex. When was the last time you called Jesus sister?
All right, so there is the TikTok. You know the drill. Don't be a troll. Be Christ-like. We're going to go back through here and kind of walk through this TikTok. But before we do, there's a couple things that I want you to know. One, I want these TikToks to be more educational. I'm not here to tear apart this person or question anything about. I want to look at the argument, and I want to provide you with the information that I have found on this argument to prove that it's got holes in it and it's wrong. The links are going to be in the description below that are going to get you started on that. Just so you know, I'm not including everything down there, because when you start looking up Lady Wisdom or Sophia or anything like that, you're going to run into a ton of content that talks about Gnosticism, which is heresy. You're also going to find a bunch of stuff that goes into the occult and witchcraft, because Sophia and Lady Wisdom are really deeply tied to the female deities. And because of that, there's a lot of craziness out there connected to them. What he's saying here is just the tip of the crazy iceberg in regards to how far heretical and outside of orthodoxy you can get. But it gets a lot darker and a lot deeper. I would not encourage you to really pursue those. But obviously, if you look up Lady Wisdom and you look up Sophia, you're going to see that stuff. What I have provided below are links to the stuff that I think is really applicable to this specific conversation in regards to the verses he uses, the Nicene Creed that he references, and a couple of videos that kind of break down. One of them is really long, one of them is shorter. They kind of break down this argument much like we're doing here, but in a more general manner. So check those out. Make sure you do that after you watch this video. So let's walk through this and kind of look at his argument and then reference some things that I think are very important to know while we approach this sort of claim that he's making.
What you're about to learn is some of the most radical information you've ever heard about Christianity or Jesus Christ ever. Like, you're never going to be able to think about this stuff the same way again. And the crazy part is that this is as orthodox as it gets. All Christians have agreed on this since the beginning, and almost nobody realizes what it really means.
Okay, so just to start with, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but anytime someone makes an extravagant claim like this, I would say it's a little suspect, right? I mean, it's just like if you're going to go buy a car and they tell you, like, this is the best car you've ever going to buy. You ain't never going to get a better car than this. Your car's probably going to break down in a week. So the idea here, I mean, he really builds this up as two things. One, this is going to change your entire theology. And two, all Christians for all time have believed this. Well, how are those two, like, those two don't normally go together. Normally, to be frank, if that claim is made, you're in heresy land already. So just watch that. Anytime somebody makes a huge, extravagant claim that kind of is meant to knock you off your chair and shock you a bit, it's probably been heresy that's been brought up at one point or another and refuted, and it's not as new as they make it sound. So just heads up on that. Let's keep going.
Earliest Christian convictions was that Jesus Christ was the incarnation of Lady Wisdom.
We'll get into that more in a minute.
Who's Lady Wisdom? Lady Wisdom, or Sophia in the Greek, is a character who appears in the book of Proverbs, also the Apocrypha. Christians have always declared that she was the pre-incarnate Christ, the eternal Logos. At the Council of Nicaea, no one was debating this fact. They were debating how to interpret it.
Okay, so there's a couple things here before he gets into the references to Paul. So what he's doing here is he's connecting Lady Wisdom, found in Proverbs, to an actual gendered deity. That's what he's doing. He's taking what we find in Proverbs, which is a personification of the attributes that are attributed to Lady Wisdom, and he's saying, no, this is an actual feminine deity. That's the assertion he's making, that she's called Lady Wisdom in Proverbs, and therefore we should take that at face value, and she is Sophia, which he's translating that again. He's making a pretty big leap from that Hebrew text into the Greek text of Sophia, even though Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. But the idea here is that he's making that connection and then connecting that to the female deity, Sophia, which that connection isn't clearly there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Paul literature. The idea, though, is what he's saying is that nobody at the Council of Nicaea was arguing this idea of that Jesus was the incarnation of Lady Wisdom. Yes and no. Okay, so there's a few things we have to know about the Council of Nicaea. It was primarily convened because there was a huge rift in the Christian church at the time about whether Christ was always God or if he was begotten and made. The proponent of the fact, or this idea, the proponent of the idea that Jesus was begotten and made was Arius. And one of the texts that he references, it wasn't his main text, but one of the texts that Arius references is Proverbs 8. And he's saying that since wisdom was made, or Lady Wisdom was made, and that connection is pointing toward Jesus, then Jesus was begotten and he was made, and therefore he was not co-eternal always with the Father. And that's what was being decided primarily at Nicaea. Was Jesus always God? Was he co-eternal with the Father from time way back? And they do make that, the claim that he made about Jesus and wisdom and the Logos always being. That's the thing, because we're connecting it back to John, right? The Gospel of John. So that was the big controversy that was trying to be solved at Nicaea. The layer that's on top of that I can't find any evidence for is that this gendered deity is part of that conversation. That does not seem to be the case. Now, we can make that mistake whenever we're looking at gendered nouns, right? So the idea is that every other language, primarily Spanish, Greek, English doesn't really have it, but where we connect gender to certain things. So for example, the closest that we have is like if I had a truck, I'm like, she's a good truck, right? Like we're connecting a gender to it, even though we know it isn't gendered. But in other languages, that is a thing, that all of these words are gendered in one way or another, whether they be masculine or feminine. That doesn't make them masculine or feminine. That's just how the language is designed, and that's how it is spoken and written. So when we look at Proverbs, Lady Wisdom is gendered as a female. It is the personification of a woman. This idea that these attributes is what we see in Proverbs, and Solomon attributes that to Lady Wisdom. Now, that discussion doesn't seem to be at the Council of Nicaea at all. The Council of Nicaea is primarily concerned about Jesus' deity, and if he was always with the Father, or if he was begotten. Was he the same substance of the Father, or was he of a similar substance? Like, there's a lot deeper theology happening at the Council of Nicaea, completely disconnected to the gender of Jesus. They knew the gender of Jesus. That wasn't a discussion that was being had. So I want you to see that oftentimes in heresies, what happens is that we have a kernel of truth, and then there's layers piled on top of it that don't have any real backing. Now, that being said, as I said at the beginning of the video, there are a lot of cults, a lot of heretical cults that are connected to Christianity in one way or another that would claim that. But they are clearly outside of orthodoxy. And that's an important distinction to make. This is why we have councils, for example. This is why after the Council of Nicaea, Arius was excommunicated as a heretic, because the Council of Nicaea decided that Jesus was co-eternal with the Father. He was always God. He wasn't made but he was always. So Arius was excommunicated after that, and the heresy of Arianism is a thing. So we have to understand that there are things that are inside orthodoxy and there are things outside of orthodoxy. So are there people that claim the very thing that he's claiming? There are, but they've been declared heretics by the searching of Scripture and the councils being brought together and kind of seeing, what is and what isn't founded in Scripture. And that's why we have councils, and that's why there is church discipline and excommunication, so that we can say what is biblical and what isn't biblical. So that being said, let's move on to these texts that he says that Paul actually makes this connection to, and we'll discuss those.
It's universally clear that Jesus is Sophia, Sophia is Jesus, and Hebrews backs this up.
Okay, so these are the three texts that he specifically mentions. Now, one of the things that I talked about before is that there is this connection to Jesus and wisdom. Now, when you start saying lady wisdom, you're making a very strong connection to Proverbs that isn't necessarily brought down through rabbinical teaching, and Paul wouldn't have held this either. There are attributes that we see in lady wisdom or in wisdom that we do see lived out in the person and work of Jesus Christ. So in these texts that he's looking at, and I would encourage you to read not just these verses, but the whole chapters there, so you can get the whole context of what's happening. What Paul is referencing is he's making the connection for the people he's writing to, that this understanding they have of the attributes of God, this attributes of the personification of wisdom that we see in Proverbs. He says we don't really need to point to the personification of wisdom anymore, because we have all of these attributes lived out in the person and work of Jesus Christ. So all of the things that we were looking at before, all of these attributes of God that we saw, that we read about, are actually not just figurative anymore. We don't have to paint a picture to understand what they look like, because we have that actually lived out in front of us in the person and work of Jesus. So his claim here is Paul's pointing back, going, look who Jesus is. He's Lady Wisdom. My argument is that Paul's going, we don't need to necessarily point to some figurative personification, because we have somebody now in the person and work of Jesus. So Paul is making that connection, but you have to distinguish how he's making that connection. And I think if you read it within context here, what you'll see is Paul is he's knowledgeable in Proverbs. I mean, he's knowledgeable in the Old Testament, and he's making this connection and for the people and pointing and saying, this is the person and work of Jesus. These are the attributes that Jesus had. He is this Messiah. So anyway, keep going here. We're going to end real quick on this note.
What this means is that Jesus is, in fact, a woman as well as a man. He's intersex. When was the last time you called Jesus sister?
Okay, so he ends with this sort of punch. Like he tries to surprise you at the beginning of the video, and then he ends it with, Jesus is intersex, and you should call him sister. To kind of get you a little riled up, right? That's the whole point, is to surprise you, to make you scratch your head a little bit and go, I wonder, right? That's the whole point of this video. Now, I have a couple problems with this, obviously. The first one is his definition that he's using for Jesus being intersex isn't true to the definition of intersex. Intersex is someone born with male and female parts, and they have to, make that decision, right? What he's actually describing is much more of a transgenderism, where Jesus is the incarnation of Lady Wisdom. He's a male, but Lady Wisdom is sort of his spirit. That's his implication. So even his definition is wrong. I think both are bogus, obviously. They're both heresies, but he's not even consistent in his definition here. Secondly, and this is where context comes into play, we talk about context consistently. If you go back and read Proverbs chapter 7, the whole thing, what you're going to see is its analogy. The whole thing is to show us, hey, this is what you should do. These are the actions that you can take that are wise actions to do. And you can see that it's not literal. Proverbs isn't meant to be read literally. And that's how he's taking it. He's taking it as you should call Jesus sister, because the connection he's making is Jesus is wisdom, and wisdom is called sister. And since wisdom is called sister and Jesus is wisdom, that you should call Jesus sister. And it's just this really weird, out of context, discombobulated line in order to make a really exaggerated point that is not even there. So, 3 things in this video. 1, there are going to be people that say shocking things to try to get you to question, what is that? But don't provide any real backing for what they're saying other than just spitting it out there. 2, you can disprove a lot of this just by looking up their claims. The fact that heresies have already been refuted on this very issue, and things have been talked about on this very issue, and they're clearly outside of Orthodox teaching. 3, If you're in your Bible and you understand how to read certain texts of literature and context and how it should be applied and how it should be read, things like this are very easy to refute because you understand that Proverbs isn't meant to be taken literally. Proverbs is a great example of what it looks like to be wise and how it is to live those things out, and that analogy that's played out throughout Proverbs. Guys, hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any comments or suggestions on TikToks to view in the future, please load those in the comments below. If this was helpful to you, make sure you like it, share it, subscribe to this channel. Thank you, guys. I'll talk to you later.